On today's show, the future of Mike Evans. Will he stay or will he go? I'll discuss next on this edition of the Bucs Report. Let's get Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast Network. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show online. It's bucsreport.com. And the best way that you can help grow this show is to subscribe to the Bucs Report on YouTube, like the videos, comment anything down below. So in this edition of the Bucs Report, we talk about the future of one of the key players on this team, Mike Evans. And it's interesting. This storyline keeps going. Will he stay? Will he go? And I think at the end of the day, all of it really has to do with him. Is he chasing down another Super Bowl? Is he going to choose a team that he perceives is going to give him the best shot at doing that? Or, is he a loyal Bucs player that wants to retire as a Buck? And there's certain things that make me feel like that's the case. He's very involved in the community, the city of Tampa. And, it seems like he's happy playing here. But I think that to a certain extent, he sees the writing on the wall, right? That he's not getting any younger. And would he like to do that? Would he like to go out and win one more Super Bowl? So this is going to be a very Mike Evans-centric episode. So let's dive into it in today's episode. So should Mike Evans retire as a Buck? The biggest question, Bucs Nation out there, what are your thoughts? Hit me up on Twitter at DanCaps218 or at Bucs MinuteCast. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, right? But is that what's best for him and the organization? Because at some point, at some time, the Buccaneers are going to have to prepare for the post-Evans era. Because here we go. The headline is simple. Mike Evans is playing in 2026. That part is locked in. The question is, where? We've heard a lot of different things. I've heard things about the Bills, the Texans. Seem like kind of a no-brainer. I've even heard teams that seem highly unlikely, like the Browns. Is he going to be the kind of guy that chases down money? I think that plays at least a part of it, right? That, your football playing window is relatively short. I know he's had, a fairly lengthy career, but I mean, I hate to say it. Maybe if I was in his shoes, I would chase down the almighty dollar, since this is your chance to make some money playing pro sports. And if you're asking me, this needs to end the only way it should end, in Tampa, in pewter and red, and of course in the creamsicle, if there's that worked in there. But let's just start with the history, of course. Evans is the greatest offensive player in franchise history. Yeah, I said it. I'm not afraid to say it. Even with Brady having his 3 legendary seasons here, Evans has been a constant. 13 seasons. How the time has flown, right? It doesn't seem like it was, that long ago that he was a rookie in the league. But that is just kind of the way life works. Things progress a lot quicker. And over 100 career touchdowns, the franchise leader in basically every receiving category that matters. And that's huge. Only a couple of elite all-time receivers retired the team that drafted him: Larry Fitzgerald, Marvin Harrison. That is rare air. Evans has a chance to join that company. And, it's all about where this team is positioned, right? That, they started off so strong last season, and the air got let out of the tire. And part of that was Evans was injured, Godwin was injured, that, this team started so promising and it fell short. So is he concerned about it? Does he think that this team is going to be able to run it back with a similar roster next year? And what kind of moves does Jason Light have up his sleeve? There are a lot of things to consider. Because let's be real here, the connection with Baker Mayfield is legit. Since Baker arrived, Evans has been dominant again. So the chemistry is there. The trust is there. And when the Bucs need a play, where does the ball go? Number 13, right? And now, yes, the 1,000-yard streak ended. Injuries got him, hamstring, clavicle. It happens at 32 going on 33. But when he came back, you saw it. 6 catches, 132 touchdowns. So, if you want to have any notion that he's washed, that is still a matchup nightmare. Now, the thing that has been, drawn more into focus on Evans as he's gotten older, of course, is the injury thing, right? That it seems like he is getting injured. It seems like at least once a year there's one major injury that sidelines him. So that to me is a bit concerning. Now, emotionally, he wants it. He said he wants to be a Buck for life, but of course he says that. I mean, I don't think he's going to be under contract and say, I want out of here. So the foundation is here. The legacy is here. His kids are growing up here. That stuff matters. So the real question is whether the front office values that legacy enough to make it work financially. And that's the tough part, right? That you have to, at some point, position yourself about, the post-Evans, the post-Godwin, the post-Levante David era, because it's coming whether you like it or not. And I run into this in the other sports that I cover as well. There's a legendary player on that team, and people seem to have their claws dug in, like this player cannot go anywhere. Listen, I don't want to get older. Evans doesn't want to get older. I don't want to have to, get so old that I'm not going to be able to work anymore, kind of. But so I think that Evans is that way as well. And I think the fans are that way as well, is there's this reluctance to turn the page. Evans has been huge for this team for many years. But if he doesn't want to be here, the Bucs don't want him here. They need to get ready for what is next. All right, next, let's pivot to the money versus the defense. Re-signing Evans could cost the Bucs the defense and the help that they desperately need, because that's the biggest part, right? Is you put too much money in one player or one position, and it leaves the other positions exposed. The defense. I mean, I don't think we can kind of, turn a blind eye to that. That was one of the biggest weaknesses, if not the biggest weakness for the Bucs in the latter part of last season, and, we talk about earlier in the season, the late game heroics. Well, that was short-lived. At the end of the season, the defense and the play in general just wasn't where it needs to be. So I think that, the Buccaneers do need to prioritize, at least to an extent, Mike Evans, but they cannot ignore the defense as well. So that's something to consider, and we'll talk about here, because here's where it gets uncomfortable. The Bucs defense under Todd Bowles was not good enough last year, and yet he will not relinquish control of that position. 19th in yards allowed, 22nd in points. And of course, we all remember that Falcons collapse, 3rd and 28. Evans screaming, walking off the field. That wasn't random. That was frustration boiling over. So, I know that these guys are well coached, just based on, PR. He's not going to dunk on the Bucs saying, "Now get me the hell out of here." That is, a truly rare player that's going to do something like that. But I think that Evans and maybe his representation, they want to see what the Bucs are going to do, right? And a lot of that is up to the Bucs as well. Do they want to put their money elsewhere? Because this roster has holes: edge rusher, linebacker, secondary depth. You start looking at the cap and you realize something fast. If Evans is getting anywhere between 15 and 20 million per year, that is money not going to an impact edge rusher. Now, think about the names floating out there. Trey Hendrickson type money at 20 to 25 million a year. That changes a defense. Or maybe you go with a linebacker. There's options out there at filling a major need if Levante David walks or retires. Yet another guy, right, that we're just going to have to embrace it, right? That a change is coming, whether we like it or not. Now, you can restructure deals. You can push cap hits down the road. but eventually that bill comes due. And the Bucs have young talent at the receiver now. Chris Godwin is under contract. Emeka Egbuka look like a future star. Jalen McMillan, Tez Johnson. That room is not empty. Now, I just rattled off a bunch of names there. Chris Godwin, we know who Godwin is, but he got to feel sorry for the guy, has been injured. And, generally speaking, it's players injuring him. And some of them, I'm going to go ahead and say look deliberate. At least one of them looked deliberate. Emeka Egbuka flashed last season. Jalen McMillan, again, got injured in the preseason. Tez Johnson. There is options, right? But you have to have a Mike Evans-esque type receiver out there. We can't just throw around and say, hey, we got Egbuka, we got McMillan, we got Tez. Yeah, you got a lot of players, but are any of them going to do what Mike Evans did and does? So you have to ask the hard question, is the offense good enough without Evans if the defense gets significantly better? This is the chess match Jason Licht is playing right now. And again, I stand by my statement that I do believe that this is going to be a make or break season for Licht and Todd Bowles, really. That they've and to be honest with you, I'm surprised the Glazers didn't decide to make a change. That either telling Licht that he should change the head coach, or Jason Licht getting canned. And I know that he did a lot of good things about 5 years ago, bringing Brady and Gronkowski here, but this team has slid, right? And I think it's easy to sweep some of that under the rug because they made it to the playoffs, but now they didn't last year. So now things are getting real. So Mike Evans, the Buccaneers, a lot of questions to consider. All right, so coming up here after the break, the contender temptation. Biggest takeaway, if Evans leaves, it will be for a true Super Bowl contender with an elite quarterback. Who might that be? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast Network, simulcast on the Bucs Minicast podcast feed, a part of the Fans First Sports Network. So if Evans goes, if he decides to leave, I don't think it is a foregone conclusion that he is going to want to go to a team that has a pretty good chance of winning a Super Bowl. See the Chiefs. Again, I've drawn the lines to the Texans based on where he's from. The Bills, right? That you got to think that stirs the drink for him, money and the potential of playing on a team that's going to do great things. So let's talk about that here in the next segment here, is that if he does leave, it will most certainly go to a Super Bowl contender. Because if he does walk, and if it happens, it's not for a rebuild. It's not for vibes. He's going to chase a ring. Start with Kansas City, right? You put Evans with Patrick Mahomes, and suddenly that offense has a real number one receiver again. Since Tyreek Hill left, they have not had a true alpha wideout. If Travis Kelce is slowing down or retires, that becomes massive, right? That the Chiefs didn't make it to where they had hoped to last year. I think that team is running out of gas a little bit, that Mahomes magic and everything else associated with that team. I think some of that magic is running short, and I think that well is running a little dry. Then there is the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen, of course, one hell of a quarterback, has not had a consistent top-tier touchdown receiver the last couple seasons. Evans, in cold weather, I do not love it for his hamstrings, right? But Allen throwing jump balls in January, that works. Another intriguing name, of course, Drake May, and how that team made it to the final dance, but didn't ultimately finish the dance, if you will, is the New England Patriots are interesting too. As we know, Drake May is ascending. They made a Super Bowl run without a true number one wideout. Evans gives them instant red zone credibility that they have not had since, Randy Moss, right? They've had options in there, but it's been a bit. And of course, like I said, do not forget the Texans. He is from Galveston. This is CJ Stroud. Plus, that defense is appealing, but they already have size at receiver and cap space is tight. If he leaves Tampa, it will be because he sees a clear Super Bowl path somewhere else. So now let's pivot to what will actually happen. This feels like leverage, but the Bucs still have to prove they are serious about winning. Now, here's my read. This feels agent driven. It feels like, hey, Tampa, we love you, but let's see what the market says, right? And remember this, a season or so ago, time flies here, where he said, this is the hard deadline, and then we're not talking about it anymore. So his representation, they really know how to kind of throw their muscle around. And I think that, at the end of the day, it at least has some to do with that. Free agency talks open March 9th. Deals can be signed March 11th. This will move fast. Evans has said he thinks he can play 3 more years. If that is true, he wants those years to matter. The Bucs went 8-9, missed the playoffs. This is not what a true Hall of Famer wants at the end of his career. He wants to go victorious, not in a whimper. So the message to Tampa is simple. Pay me fairly. Show me you are aggressive on defense. Convince me that this team is still a contender. If they do that, I think he stays. Legacy matters. Comfort matters. Being a Buck for life matters. But if the Bucs hesitate, if they lowball, if they prioritize future flexibility over present respect, then do not be shocked if number 13 is catching touchdowns somewhere else in 2026. I really believe that. And Bucs fans, that would be weird. That would be really weird to see him suiting up in a Texans jersey or a Chiefs or whatever the case, because some players just belong in one uniform, and Mike Evans feels like one of them, right? I think he really does. So, at the end of the day, it's up to Mike Evans, what he wants to do. But in a lot of ways, the Buccaneers have put themselves in this position that they're in right now. That, like I said, last season here, I'm talking about already that the Buccaneers, when they were floundering, when Jason Light reached for a guy that hadn't played pro ball in a while in JPP, then ultimately you kind of knew that things weren't going according to the script, that some of the gravitas that Jason Light had earlier in his career, when he was able to bring down big targets like Tom Brady and Gronkowski, these kind of things, that I don't know if it's because players don't want to come here. I don't know if it's because the Glazers have the purse strings tied too shut. But in any event, it's one of the things that I think that, they paid a lot of money to Tom Brady, to Gronkowski, and all of the circus that came to town to ultimately help the Bucs win another Super Bowl. But now the bill is coming due. And I think some of those were deferred payments, and the interest, I'm speaking metaphorically, of course, here, is through the roof. And I think that, partially actually, that I don't think they have the money, and I don't think the draw to come to Tampa is what it once was, right? That it's easy to have players and coaches that want to come here because you could manage, coach a legend like a Brady. And since then, it's kind of been a slower descent. And people with slower descent, what are you talking about? They've won the NFC South, X amount of years, right? But what I'm talking about is the plane is kind of coming under the clouds, and it's getting lower and lower, that you actually saw the Bucs miss the playoffs period last year, that changes are here. And some glaring things that should have been addressed weren't addressed. A lot of people will say, don't talk about Todd Bowles disparagingly. Well, he is the head coach. And, this is a Mike Evans episode, but this all circles back to if, he's looking around this team left and right. And man, I don't think we look any better, or we will be any better next year. It's going to be really hard for him to be, a homer at the end of the day. And I think that that's what we're hoping for, is that he's a homer for Tampa. Like, I'm not going because I got pewter running through my veins. Yeah, maybe. But if he does have a few years left, like he says, I don't think he wants to spend those years out in the wilderness, playing with subpar teams. There's still a lot of questions about Baker Mayfield, who the other receivers are going to be. Will they go out and address the defense? A lot of it, I think it's his agent, and his agent is right. Let's kind of wait and see what this team is doing. Are they for real? Or, is this team done? Are the best years of the Buccaneers in the rearview mirror? I guess, it's ultimately up to Jason Light, the Glazers, and what Todd Bowles and his new crew can get out of new players and that kind of thing. But the position that we're in is, again, and I've spoke about this on this before. I also spoke about this with a guy on the Bucs Report as well. Not a top tier team, let's say in comparison to the Miami Dolphins, for example. So in any event, when you take a look at the Bucs, they have some tough decisions to make. Do they want to prioritize Evans? Do they want to prioritize these players kind of the past, or do they want to push their chips all in on the future? That is a tough question for the Bucs, Jason Light and the Glazers. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast Network. Again, the best way that you can help grow this show is to subscribe or follow the Bucs Report on YouTube, like the videos, comment anything down below, and I'll talk to you again next time.